Hey YouTube. Today I'm going to be talking about my playthrough of Lies of P. Just to quickly summarize my thoughts on the game. For the longest time, I held Lies of P in the highest echelon of Souls-likes, even beating out pretty much everything that FromSoft themselves have made. I think that uh, even some of the most well-loved FromSoft games, such as Bloodborne. I do like Elden Ring's gameplay. I have some issues with that game, but Elden Ring has also very good gameplay and some very good bosses. But for me, Lies of P has always kind of been a step above that. There's only one game or one Souls like that I've played that has kind of dethroned Lies of P from that number one spot, and that was Kazan. But nevertheless, Lies of P is still an extremely well made game. There's so much to like. I really don't have too many complaints. One of the, there's a few bosses I don't like in Lies of P. I think that there was one boss, the DLC, that I really wasn't quite fond of, but pretty much almost everything else I think is amazing. And I have very, very little complaints. Just like most videos, I'll start with the positives and I'll leave the negatives for last. I don't think there's really going to be too many negatives, but I'll start with the gameplay. Obviously, I really, really like parry-based Souls-like games. Um, the game that kind of, in my opinion, I mean, it's not even an opinion. I think it's pretty much a fact at this point that sort of pioneered this type of Souls-like gameplay was Sekiro, and I think Sekiro is a great game. But I think it also suffers from certain things. For example, you're basically stuck using one weapon in Sekiro. I also think that the parry window is pretty lenient, so that if you are playing the default difficulty of that game, it can be quite easy. I know that there's a hard mode, and that makes things a lot more difficult, but I do think that base Sekiro um, can be a little bit too forgiving in my opinion. And the beauty of Lies of P is that Lies of P has a much more stricter timing for its parries, and it also has certain attacks that the enemies can use against you that require a perfect parry. Otherwise, you will get hit. Those are those red attacks where the enemy kind of glows red, and the only way to really not take damage in that game is to get a perfect parry, which easier said than done. But generally speaking, the flow of combat in Lies of P is very, very, very good. The combat is so much fun. There's a lot of weapons that you can play around with. I actually didn't use the. I guess I should explain what it is first. So in Lies of P, you can interchange the handle of a weapon with its blade portion and sort of create your own custom sort of weapon. While I didn't really mess around with this too much because in reality, it just it was hard for me to really grasp, and I'd rather just use the vanilla version of said weapon. But what determines the move set is the handle, and I think that the speed of your swing is also determined by the blade of it. So if you take a giant hammer and you stick it on like the baton handle, you'll still have the baton moveset, but it's going to be a lot slower. So um, but there's a lot of variety in the attack combos in the game. There are two, for example, there's two daggers. There's a crit dagger, like a dexterity based dagger, and then there's a flame one. And, they have a slightly different moveset, which I really, really like. I think that's, some of my complaints for FromSoft games is that, they'll have all these weapons, but they'll all share a moveset. Or for the most part, they'll mostly share a moveset. I know there's some exceptions to that rule, but a good example is I played Dark Souls 3 recently, and I was looking at all the daggers in that game, and it has like 10 daggers or something, and there's maybe two or three that like truly, truly felt unique, and a lot of them, just had a slightly different scaling, or you know, one of them might do a little bit of poison damage. So even though Lies of P might only have two daggers, I do like how they have different R1 combos in some ways. Like there's a slight variation of the combos. Now I didn't use them in my playthrough. I am going off of memory because I have played this game about I want to say 3 or 4 times. I hope I'm not. I don't look like an idiot, and I'm totally wrong on this, but I do vaguely remember that even like those two daggers had some slight variations in the moveset. Other nice things that are in the game, is being able to change the outfit of your character. I think that is really nice. It's just another way to add a collectible that you can find throughout your playthrough and just make your main character, make P himself look how you like. So I always, have a favorite outfit that you actually get fairly early on. I do pretty much every playthrough with that outfit. So that is a cool thing that you can do in this game. There's also hats. There's like the outfit. I think that there's the hats, and I think that there's glasses as well. So I kind of wish that some Souls games would do this because for example, when I played Dark Souls 3 or Dark Souls 2, I played those games with the Desert Pyromancer armor. But there's no good way to have transmog in that game. You have to do it via a mod, or just wear that set of armor. You know what I mean? And it's kind of nice that you can change how P looks in this game without having to change your stats, basically. In terms of the equipment in the game, I think it's relatively standard. I believe that there's four kinds of types of equipment that you can put on P, and there's the different you know weight thresholds that you have based on your equipment. So I'm not really going to talk too much about that. I mean, it's fairly standard. A lot of the time, really most of the time, I would just equip what would make me the most tanky against certain bosses that might inflict poison or disruption, which is one of the debuffs in the game. I might switch that up just so I don't succumb to those status ailments. But otherwise, it's a pretty standard system. I'm not really good. I don't really have any complaints towards it. I mean, it works. It does what it's supposed to do. No need to really reinvent the wheel with it. So one of the things I also liked as well is the levels. I actually have seen some people complain about the levels in Lies of P. They'll say that they're too linear or too straightforward. Personally, I like that. I like how, for example, in the Neo games, excluding Neo 3, how you just load into the level and your goal is to get to the end of the level. You take a game like Dark Souls 3, where it's for the most part fairly linear, or even using Kazan as an example. A lot of people are complaining about the Kazan levels because they were, I guess, quote unquote, too linear. But I personally like that. One of my biggest complaints of, for example, Elden Ring, is the fact that it's open world. And, to me, it just feels like you're wasting so much time just riding the horse on this empty open field doing nothing. Whereas I feel like in Lies of P, the levels are a lot more focused, and it's more really about the combat, engaging with the amazing combat that they have created, as opposed to exploring this giant map, finding stuff that you're never going to use. Now, don't get me wrong, like there are things that you'll find in Lies of P that you are never going to use. Generally, I don't really use many consumables, if any, during playthroughs of Souls likes, and this is no exception. You'll find stuff that is just going to sit in your inventory, and you're never going to use it. At least if you kind of play the game like me. But a lot of the time you're not going to have the time wasting of something like Elden Ring, where you're just trying to find the next point of interest. And Lies of P is very much a streamlined linear experience, which I personally like. So I have zero complaints about the Lies of P levels. Usually for Souls like there's at least one level that is just complete hell to get through, and really even like the poison themed levels of Lies of P are pretty good. Like there isn't a single level in the game that I truly hate. I mean, if there's a slight complaint I may have is maybe the last dungeon, that it's extremely long. That is probably my least favorite dungeon. I wish they would have maybe made that slightly less long and just taken some of that length and put it on another level, or maybe even create a whole new level from scratch, because the final area can drag on quite a bit. Um, the only other maybe slight complaint is the mansion where you fight the Puppet King Romeo, that has those disruption spiders. I will admit this is kind of going to the complaints, but I figured I just started talking about it, so I might as well mention it. I'm not really a huge fan of disruption, as a debuff. It's more annoying than anything. I often find that You kind of hit the enemy for a little bit, then you run away. You're waiting for the debuff meter to come back down, and you kind of rinse and repeat. It's just kind of cumbersome. I could do without. I could do without the disruption debuff if I'm being honest. But it's a minor complaint. It doesn't really ruin the game for me. So generally speaking, I think all the areas are pretty good. What I like about them is that they look unique. You have like the factory, the Vanini factory. You have the puppet graveyard, which is really cool looking. I like the Lorenzini arcade. It has like a little bit of a spooky vibe to it, so I like that quite a bit. So, um, what was that other area where you fight Victor? It's like the fair. It's not the fair. It's like a museum. The point I'm making is that all these areas are visually unique and they look really cool. And the DLC actually has a lot of really really cool areas. I mean, you got the zoo, which is awesome. It's got all these like mutated animals. It's very very interesting. You have I think it's called the Vivarium. That might be the wrong term, but it's where you fight the lady with her puppet. It's like it has all these plants and stuff, and it's kind of grassy. You're fighting these weird looking robots. And then you got the prison level right after that. So all these levels look very very unique. They don't look the same, which is really nice. That's actually one of my small complaints with Kazan is while not every level in Kazan looks the same, they kind of sort of blend in. Like right now, it's hard to kind of differentiate some of the Kazan areas. They can look a little bit samey, but I think Lies of P did a really, really good job at making these areas look unique. And again, since I like the linear structure of the game, I just overall always have a good time playing through these. Another huge positive is the bosses. I mentioned before, there's maybe two or three bosses that I don't really like. I'll get to those later. But generally speaking, almost every boss is great. From the Parade Master, I think the Parade Master is a great introductory boss. You have the Watchman, which is a pretty significant difficulty spike in the early game, but he's a lot of fun to fight. He's very aggressive, and he really makes you kind of get into this groove of getting good at parrying. And just there's so many good bosses. Romeo's a lot of fun, especially in the second phase. Victor is fun. Um, so there's really not much to say. I'm not going to go through every boss because I'm just going to be saying that X boss is fun. You know, they're all very very good. Especially some of the end game bosses. Nameless Puppet is amazing. Even like Seisha is pretty good. I think like Seisha, you know, there's aspects of her that are fun, but it can be hard to know what the hell she's gonna do because she's so fast. But even then, like despite even like minor gripes with some of these bosses, almost all of them are amazing. And the beauty is that I think that Liza P, in my opinion, has sort of mastered these sort of I call them PvP fights, and Dark Souls is full of them. It's basically when you are fighting an enemy that shares the moveset that a player. So when you're fighting like an invader in Dark Souls, and it just turns into an annoying roll fest, and it looks janky as hell. I hate them. I've always hated, what I call not semi PvP, but I mean, they kind of simulate PvP, but you're fighting the AI basically. You're fighting an enemy that has the moveset of the player. And again, I've always hated those. And in Lives of P, there are these fights where you are fighting these humanoid characters who have weapons that P can use as well. Um, but the reason why they're fun in this game is because instead of just both you know fighters just rolling all over the place. In Lies of P, it almost feels more like a dance where you attack, then you block and you attack and you block. It feels similar to Sekiro in a sense. A lot of the Sekiro mini bosses are like this, and you're basically slowly chipping away at the enemy's posture bar until you can completely fill it up. You go for your heavy attack and you get big damage. So I think that the flow of these sort of humanoid, player moveset humanoid fights are really really good. Again, in most games I end up hating them. Even in Neo, like I love Neo. Neo's great. Neo has great gameplay. But one of the things I hate about the Neo humanoid fights is that some enemies just have, you know, an ungodly amount of stamina, and they just block all your stuff. You're basically just swinging at them, and they block, and they regain their stamina, instantly sometimes, and it can just feel kind of annoying. Whereas in this game, I do think that they flow so much better. And you got Mad Donkey. I believe Survivor is his name. He's a Benini. You got the White Lady, um, the Owl Doctor. I think there's a couple of more, but these are all very good. I mean, I don't think they're as good as like the main line bosses, but they're still a lot of fun. Quickly, just have to talk about the Fable system again. I quite like it. I like it a lot more than sort of the weapon art system in some of the more recent FromSoft games like Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring, mainly because I believe every weapon has two weapon arts. I could be wrong. But I'm almost positive every weapon has two weapon arts, and not weapon arts, but Fable arts. That's what they're called in this game, and they use varying amounts of Fable meter. And yeah, it's just a great system. You obviously build Fable by hitting your opponent, and then you can use it to use one of your two sort of special abilities, depending on what weapon you're using. And some weapons, these could give you like a range bonus. There's a shovel weapon in the game where one of the Fable abilities is that it gets longer. You know, um, and I used one, for example, I used the nameless puppet scissor weapon for the DLC, and I believe one of the Fable arts for that game is that you get some like added crit. Then one of them was just this like anime looking, 5-hit combo. The cool thing about the Fable arts is that I believe they count as heavy attacks. So when you have filled your opponent's posture bar, you can use a Fable art to essentially, consume that posture bar and stagger your opponent. So I like that added layer of flexibility, where you don't always have to go for a charged heavy attack to stagger your opponent. You can sometimes go ahead and use those Fable arts, which is just a really nice system. I don't really have too much else to say. I think it's a lot more smoother than Dark Souls and Elden Ring, for example, because I believe in those games, and I could be wrong. I believe that in Dark Souls 3 and before, you actually I think Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 1 didn't even have this, but in Dark Souls 3 you have a weapon special, but you only have one, and it's tied to your blue bar, so you have to like attune your Estus to blue Estus so you can fill up that bar. And what I like about Lies of P is that it just feels like it's more smoothly incorporated into the combat. You recover this naturally. You're more incentivized to use it, whereas you can play all of Dark Souls 3 and never use a single weapon art. You know what I mean? And sometimes, like, why would you sacrifice a health potion for a weapon art that's kind of shitty? There might be crappy weapon arts in Lies of P, but the fact that that the Fable regenerates just by engaging in combat sort of gives you a higher incentive to play around with them. So I like that quite a bit. Again, I like the variety with some of these. Like some of them are a parry. Some of the Fable arts are a parry. Some of them are like a special attack. Some of them influence your weapon. I think there's multiple weapons where that Fable art, makes that weapon have extra range. So there's a very nice variety in the Fable arts in this game. I also have to talk about the system in this game when you run out of potions. It has a specific name, and I forgot what it's called. Um, so I'm just gonna describe what it is. When you run out of potions in this game, you essentially have the ability to get one additional potion by hitting your opponent. So let's say you're fighting a boss, you've used all your potions. You're in this. I think it's called discharge state. I could be wrong, but let's just, for argument's sake, let's just call it discharged. So you've used all your potions, you're in this discharged state, and every hit that you do on your opponent kind of fills up this bar to the point where you can build one additional potion. And I love the system. It is really, really great. It basically rewards you for playing well. If you could have made a couple of mistakes early on in the fight, but if you play well at the end, you can generate a 1 to 2 more heals if you don't take damage. So it's a beautiful system. I really, really enjoyed it. I don't think there's any other Souls like that I know of that really has made something like this, and I think they just did such a good job. I really can't compliment this discharged system enough. It is absolutely amazing. I wish more Souls-like games should really take notes and honestly just copy it because it's so good. Um, Again, it doesn't feel cheap, and it feels like it rewards you for playing well, which is the beauty of it. Quick notes on the P organ system. There's basically this. It's called the P organ, where you can use these items that you find throughout the levels called quartz, and they'll give you, basically passive bonuses. Some of them will give you extra potions. I believe that this is the main method to get extra potions. So I like to think of these as kind of like Estus shards. I've never had an issue with the Estus shard system. I think that that is probably uh, the best healing system in any of these games. Because I basically had a similar one where you find an item in the overworld, not in the overworld, but in the levels, and you use it to increase your potion charges. It's very straightforward. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Again, like Code Vein One had a system like this. You can find the region extension factor, and there was another item. One of them will give you an extra potion charge. One of them will make your potion stronger. Dark Souls 3 has this. The Undead Bone Shard and the Estus shards. A lot of the great Souls games have this very standard system, which I have no issues with. So the quartz are a little bit more involved because you can kind of pick if you want to use that quartz to get an extra potion, or you might want to use it to make your um, enhance another aspect of your character. Like I know that one of them makes it so that uh, I guess I'm gonna go on a little bit of a tangent because I want to go over the system. So whenever you block an enemy attack, and you don't get a perfect block, you'll get like this gray health. Um, and I believe that this is the part where I'm not 100% sure if it recovers automatically over time or if you have to hit the opponent to get it back. Regardless, when you don't get a perfect block, you get this great health, and there's this ability in the P organ tree where when you do get a perfect block, you can recover some of this great health. So on some of the late game bosses, they can go absolutely crazy. I mean, there are some bosses that just have crazy extended combos, and you're not going to perfect block every single one of these. So, but if you perfect block like half of them or 60% of them, you'll kind of see your health kind of drain when you're for the attacks that you don't perfect block. But then the ones that you do will kind of restore some of that health. So it's just a very nice flow to the fights. That's just one example of some of the passives that you know you can get in the P org, and some of them make it so that the stagger window is longer. When you've depleted an enemy's posture bar, the that state lasts a little bit longer, so you have more time to stagger the enemy. Again, I'm not going to go over all of them. The system overall, I think, is quite good. It's just another way to customize your character. But I just wanted to mention it because it is tied to the healing, and that is again, the primary way that you get more potions in this game. That pretty much covers all the positives. I mean, which is almost every aspect of the game. Actually, I'll mention the music. There's some great songs in this game, especially in the DLC. So there's this humanity system where it kind of influences your ending. And one of the ways that you increase your humanity in the game is by listening to records that you find throughout the levels. And some of these songs, especially in the DLC, are like really, really good. I was, again, trying to up my humanity because I wanted to try one of the weapons that require you to get a certain amount of humanity. And I was actually shocked at how great some of these songs are. So, again, there's not much else to say. Like the soundtrack is very, very good. Before I get to some of the negatives, one more thing I just thought of is the voice acting performances. They are very very good. Normally, I play games in their original language, so this game is Korean. So if it had a Korean dub, I would have played it in Korean, but it doesn't. So it's all voice acted in English. But they did a great job. Again, any sort of Eastern game. It's rare that I play it in English unless I have to. Um, but yeah, there's really not much negative to say. I like a lot of the performances. You know, I like Simon Manis's quite a bit. Simon Manis is great. Arlecchino, the Arlecchino guy was amazing. Like he had a very iconic voice. And you know, in the DLC there were like these audio logs with Arlecchino that you would get towards the end of the DLC, and they, you know, like they really sold the fact that Arlecchino is like this crazy killer puppet. So that guy, shout outs to that guy because that guy did a really really good job. So overall, again, there really wasn't a performance that I thought wasn't good. You know, like the Vanini guy had a pretty unique voice. Like there really isn't a single bad one that I can think of. All the voice acting is great. So I'll start with some of the negatives. I guess I'll go over the easy ones first, which are the up to three bosses I don't like. So I'll start with which, in my opinion, is the worst boss in the game. Um, Truly, the one that I am 100% on, that I will argue with anyone that this is just a shitty boss, especially in New Game Plus, and that is Door Guardian. This is the boss that you fight to get into the final area in the game, and it is just really bad. Basically, what you have to do is hit the boss's leg until he trips, and then you get a sort of riposte attack, you know, a critical attack, and then it does a ton of damage to him. So when you're hitting his legs, he's like practically taking no damage. So my biggest problem with this boss is that, you know, again, he's really big. I've said it in previous games. When the boss gets too big, where you can't see what he's doing, it can be really annoying. Now, I don't think this is like as bad as like Fire Giant or some of the other bosses, but in my opinion, I do think that he's too big. A good example of a boss that is bigger than you but is good is like Victor. You know, Victor, the champion Victor is his name, and you know, he's significantly bigger than P. I mean, he's like twice as big, but you can, I feel like you can always see what he's gonna do. And my issue with Door Guardian is that sometimes you can't see, like you're just looking at his the lower half of his body. The other issue is that he has all these extremely long windups, which are just very difficult to, in my opinion at least, maybe I just suck, but they're very difficult to get a perfect block on, and they have this debuff on you. I forgot what the debuff was, but I believe it screws with like your stamina recovery. Again, I'm going off of memory. I'm not gonna look up the nuances of Door Guardian. All I know is that I really really dislike this boss, and I distinctly remember um, and you know, this was before I was recording my playthroughs on a New Game Plus run where this was like the most painful thing I've done in a long time. Like this was like actually a shit boss. You know, he would basically just kill you in one hit. But again, all his attacks have this insane windup that just make getting a perfect block very difficult to do. And you can't really know how much damage you're doing to him because the way you do damage is by basically making him trip by hitting his legs and then doing, you know, like 60% of his health. Not 60%, but like 40% of his HP. So Door Guardian just sucks. He is not fun at all. Um, and then the other two bosses that I'm really not quite fond of, and again, this could be subjective, but I'll still go over them, is the Black Rabbit Brotherhood. The second time you fight them in the, I believe, the Trismegistus area. It's like right before you go to the final area, basically. You rematch uh, the Black Rabbit Brotherhood, and it's honestly just kind of annoying because you are fighting three enemies at once. Now, they've made it so that you know, one of them primarily focuses you, and then the other two will kind of sometimes shoot like a projectile. But it just, I've never really had much fun with it. Again, I could just be bad, but I've always dreaded doing this fight. It's not really super enjoyable. You know, the especially when you fight the girl in the squad, like the you know, the small girl. She's just so fast and annoying, and she can poison you. I think they all actually can debuff you. The Buckethead guy can inflict the thunder debuff on you. the guy with the rapier, I think, has fire. And then of course the girl has the poison. And then once you finally defeat all three of them, you have to fight the big brother. And it's just this fight is just drags on, man. It just drags on, and I just never had much fun with it. Again, maybe there's people that like it, but this is probably, in my opinion, like the second or third worst fight in the game. And then there was one fight in the DLC that I really, really didn't like, and it was the Anguish Guardian of the Ruins. Again, it's this giant sort of monster guy, and once again, uh, it's kind of hard to see what he's gonna do, and you. So he has this like thing on his face where you can. I forgot what it was. I don't know if it was like a sword or something. He basically had this thing on his face that if you did enough hits to it, you can get like a riposte attack on him for extra damage, and it's based on how many attacks, like how many hits you do. So it's not based on the damage, but it's based on number of hits. And yeah, I just never really liked this fight. My biggest issue with this fight is that it drags on for quite a long time, and it just doesn't have the same sort of flow state as the humanoid fights because he's just this big monster. Every time he hits you and you perfect block, you kind of get pushed back. And then once you get up to phase two, he has these laser attacks that, for me at least, were one shotting me. So, you have this, kind of boring first phase. And then when you finally get to the second phase, it's just getting one shot by the laser beam. So I greatly, greatly disliked this fight. Um, so those are pretty much the three bosses that I don't like. Another boss that, and this might be blasphemous to say, that I kind of didn't like too much, but I know a lot of people like it, so I'm just gonna chalk it up to just me. Was Marioka, the puppeteer lady, where you're basically fighting her and the puppet, but the puppet revives. You have to do damage to her to beat the boss. And I don't know. I just struggled with her quite a bit, and I was getting a little bit frustrated just because it's like a dual fight, but not really because um, you know, usually when the puppet's attacking, she's not attacking. Not usually. I think pretty much every time when the puppet is doing, an extended combo, she's, like controlling the puppet. So they'll never. I don't think they're attacking you at the same time. What I really hated about this fight is just the how much they change direction. Because the puppet is like flailing in the air, and sometimes the camera freaked out. I remember the camera freaking out and me just not knowing where they went. But again, it could just be me. I'm not really gonna say that Marioka is a bad boss. I'll just say that I found her a little bit frustrating. But overall, like I would still I still consider her to be a very high quality encounter. I'm just it's like a preference thing. And I think that is pretty much it in terms of bosses. I think I pretty much like every other boss in the game. I mean, the only other maybe slight complaint is like Seja. Sometimes like she's just so fast that it's hard to um, kind of learn how to block her stuff. And since she's a two-phase fight, you'll clear the first phase, you'll get good at the first phase, and then you'll get to the second phase, and you've already used some of your healing on the first one, and she just is moving at the speed of light. And sometimes, especially in the early, like when you first fight her, but this was like my fourth playthrough, so I like to think I was a little better at the fight. But especially when you first encounter her, when you fought her for the first time, it can feel frustrating to just get to phase two and just like get one shot. It's kind of similar to what happened with Consort Radon in the DLC of Elden Ring. But that's pretty much it. I mean, those are pretty much the only complaints I have with the boss of the game. Overall, they were all very good. There's just three that I didn't like, and two that I had mild annoyances with. I want to have a section talking about my favorite bosses in the game. Kind of I've mentioned earlier in the video, this most of the bosses in this game are very very good. So if I talk about every boss, I'm just going to be repeating myself constantly. So I figured I would just talk about the bosses that I think are exceptional. I'll start with the Scrapped Watchman. I think that this is a great early game boss, and it is a great skill check, and is a great encounter to teach you how to play the game. I think that if you come into Lies of P trying to play it, like a Dark Souls or even like Bloodborne or any other sort of game, and you don't play, you don't utilize the perfect parry or the perfect block in Lies of P, you're going to struggle. Mainly because P's role in this game is honestly not very good. So your best defensive option really is to block, and ideally you want a perfect block so you don't take any damage, and you don't kill your stamina basically. And I remember that when the game first came out on my first playthrough, this boss felt like one of the hardest bosses ever, and it was literally just the second boss. So even though Parade Master is sort of the tutorial boss, I think that Watchman is honestly, now that I really think about it, probably one of the best, if not the best early game boss in the genre. Um, and even to this day, after having played the game, 3 or 4 times, I still hold this boss in very high regard. Next, I'll talk about the King of Puppets, or Romeo. This is basically two bosses into one encounter. Um, I think both bosses are pretty good. If I have a slight complaint about the King of Puppets phase, is that he's constantly sort of pushing you away from him. So, um, it can be a bit of a pain if you keep dying to the second phase, which is Romeo, only to have to redo the first phase. And, I can see that that could be a little frustrating. But I think that it is honestly a lot of fun to block the attack strings of the King of Puppets phase. And I think that it has a lot of, very good telegraphs to, the game basically gives you everything you need to effectively deal with the boss. And then when you get to phase two, which is Romeo, it is a great humanoid, fast-paced encounter. Again, I have a slight complaint at what I call Romeo's super move, which is basically when he does this like fire combo. It's like a 8 hit combo, and to this day, even after having played the game, you know, 4 times, 5 times, I can't remember exactly. That combo is still brutal. If anything, I wish they would maybe tone that combo down a little bit, just because it can really feel a little bit impossible to block all of it. Sort of a decent comparison that I can think of actually is Maluka from Kazan. So Maluka also has a lot of crazy, attack strings basically, or combos. But those to me felt a little bit more intuitive. That long fire attack combo that Romeo does in Lies of P, it I don't know what maybe I'm just bad, maybe I just suck, but it feels like there's not a rhythm to it. And I've always struggled to really get the timing down on the attacks because they seem a little random. And I'm sure just like a lot of people, I had a lot of boss runs end to that, you know, fire combos. So, but overall, I still think the boss is definitely one of the best bosses in the game, and he's a lot of fun. I do want to shout out Champion Victor. I think Victor is also a lot of fun. He has a, unlike I just mentioned that Romeo's long fire combo doesn't seem to have great rhythm. For me, a lot of Champion Victor's combos do have, sort of a nice rhythm to them, and it can be very satisfying to sort of block his giant punches. He also has two phases, and the cool thing is that you know both phases are pretty different. So you get some nice variety there, and again, even in talking about my favorite bosses in the game, I'm kind of also going to be repeating myself. I like how the fight is fast paced. I like how Victor is aggressive, and overall, it's just a great time. Next, I'll talk about Lexasia, the complete, another two-phase boss fight. Um, I actually really like phase one. She has a lot of these long combos that, once again, once you get the timing down, getting the perfect blocks on them can be very, very satisfying. If anything, I actually like the first phase a lot more than the second phase. Not to say that the second phase is bad, but kind of how um, I mentioned in my negatives, uh, she just feels a little bit too fast sometimes. And again, maybe I'm just an old, decrepit, you know, person, but it can feel very difficult to block these extremely fast attack strings for the second phase. Now, the cool thing is that you can actually deflect back her projectiles if you get the perfect block, so that is a cool mechanic for that boss fight. So overall, again, Luxasia is a very high quality boss in the genre as a whole. Next, I'll talk about Nameless Puppet. A great way to end the base game. It is honestly one of the best sort of late game encounters in the genre as a whole. And once again, sort of repeating myself, sort of the same things that I like about Romeo and the same things I like about Luxasia are going to apply to Nameless Puppet. This is sort of a high octane dance, a high octane, fast paced fight that almost feels like a dance. And when you first go in, you're gonna get destroyed, but it is very rewarding to eventually pick up and learn um, the combos of the boss. And he also has two phases, and it's cool to see the how his moveset changes when you go from phase one to phase two. That's a it's kind of a common theme in Lies of P. A lot of these great bosses have two phases, so you're almost getting you know two cool combat encounters in one boss. Now we're at the DLC, and honestly, I might try to do this in just one continuous recording because besides the Anguished Guardian, um, I think pretty much every boss in the DLC is really, really good. Um, I know, one of the guys I talked to, he actually hates the it's an alligator or a crocodile. This might make me look like an idiot, but the tyrannical predator, the boss of the zoo, and I don't know if I'm just a weirdo. I don't know what everyone's thoughts are on this boss, but I actually think that he's a lot of fun. And if I'm being honest with you, if I this might make me seem very weird, but I actually had a lot more fun fighting the tyrannical predator than I did with Marioka, the puppeteer lady. Again, kind of how I mentioned in my negatives section, there are certain aspects of Marioka that I don't like. Again, I'll also put her here in the positives because I do think she's a very high quality boss. That'd just be my preference. I don't like when the puppet starts flying everywhere and I happen to be locked into the puppet and my camera starts flailing all over the place. Um, then you have Veronique, and she's almost more akin to like a mini boss, but not really. Actually, I'm not gonna put her in the mini boss section because a lot of the mini bosses in Lies of P are basically humanoid fights um, that have a weapon that shares the moveset to something that P can use. Not all of them. There are exceptions. There's the clown robot and the puppet of the future and stuff like that. But Veronique, I think, has a you can't use a weapon that is going to have the move set of what Veronique is doing. I think it's like this weird mix of like a true regular boss and like sort of like the NPC mini boss fights. But again, she's super super aggressive, and once again, blocking these sort of long strings of attacks in this game is very very satisfying. At least to me, it is. So I have no complaints with Veronique. It's another banger, another fun fight. Um, then you have the two-faced overseer. This fight was crazy. When he powers up, for a while, he really felt like impossible. Like he just never stops attacking. But I don't know. I never really got pissed off or frustrated just because Liza P just has such great gameplay that it was just always fun to just get a little bit farther after each attempt. Um, then I'm actually gonna skip over the Green Hunter fight simply just because um to me like I'm really like in the middle of it. I don't think this fight is bad, but I honestly to me it was probably like the most forgettable fight in the DLC. So overall I'll give it like a 6 out of 10. 7 out, it's pretty good, but I would put it like a step below the other bosses that I'll talk about here. Then you have Lumaccio, the leader of the bastards. This fight is really weird. He's basically once you get him to half health, he kind of like transforms into this monster, and he really has like one of the weirdest movesets. Um, and but honestly, I thought this boss was really cool. He's actually really hard. At least I think he's pretty hard. And yeah, I just think it's a great encounter. I think trying to remember. I'm going off of memory. I hope I'm not wrong and my recollection here, but I do think he can like poison you. I think it's not called poison in this game, but it's effectively poison. And I'm not really a huge fan of anything that poisons you, but besides that, again, once he kind of transforms into the monster, he just like freaks the hell out, and yeah, it's pretty scary actually. So I think he's a pretty cool fight. You first kind of go in and you're like, oh, it's like a human NPC fight, and then once he transforms, you're like fighting basically a totally new enemy. So that is really cool. And of course, you have the final boss of the DLC, Arlecchino, one of the greatest fights made in the genre. I know I've said this a lot throughout the course of this video, but like, what a great final boss! I really don't have any complaints. The first phase is like still pretty hard, but not hard enough or frustrating enough that it gets annoying to fight. Personally, like even though it took me a lot of attempts to beat this fight, I always thought fighting him on phase one was a lot of fun, and you get to phase two, and he's just absolutely crazy. And you actually, I think this is, and I could be wrong here, but this feels like the first boss that truly makes you use your dodge, because he has these like energy attacks where I'm pretty sure you can't block them, or if you can, it's really hard. So I thought that was really cool. I was getting totally wrecked by this boss after he does this like super long combo that he finishes of with this like slash that also does this like aftershock of energy, and would always get hit by it. And then once it clicked, um, it was just really rewarding to be able to basically survive this onslaught and properly fight the boss. And honestly, I think Arlecchino is probably one of the greatest um, endings to a Souls like ever. I mean, despite me putting Kazan as a whole above Lies of P, um, I find that Arlecchino is a much more enjoyable boss than Ozma from Kazan. Um, so yeah, there's not much else to say. I mean, to me, it's a 10 out of 10. Cool character, great voice performance, super fun boss. They even have the ability for if you wish to fight him with the NPC help, you can. And I like how you can choose to not use the NPC and fight him by yourself. So um, so yeah, those are pretty much all the bosses that I thought were really, really good. Again, any boss that I didn't mention here doesn't mean that they're not good. It's just that if I go through every boss, I mean, I'm just going to be repeating myself over and over and over again. Um, you know, Pretty much those 3 or 4 encounters that I talked about in my negative section. Anything not included on there, I have no issues with. I think it ranges from good to amazing. Small complaint about the upgrade system. I mentioned it. This is something that it's pretty much going to be in almost every Souls like that there is. This game has a very traditional upgrade system for the weapons. You find the upgrade material, you use it to upgrade the weapon, and the kind of the shame is that um, it kind of there's like this opportunity cost to experimenting with weapons if you have to go farm upgrade material. And I remember like on my first playthrough, I had to kill these like giant monsters in Lorenzini Arcade to get I believe it was like the Dark Moon upgrade material. And it was just so annoying. I really think that I wish most of these games just had the system that Wu Chang had, where sure you might be at a point in the game where your maximum weapon will be a +2, but if you wanted to try another weapon, you can kind of transfer that +2 to something else as opposed to having to go farm. Again, I can't really shit on the game too much because pretty much every other Souls-like is going to have a system like this, with the exception of the more weird ones like Neo. Neo has a whole different sort of thing. But yeah, you know, you do have to farm for weapon upgrades, and that can be annoying, especially after you've beaten a boss and there's a cool boss weapon you can make, and then you have to go farm upgrade material to kind of make it current. Otherwise, you're going to be doing substantially less damage. This is probably one of my few issues with the game, and it's tied to getting the golden lie. I know the golden lie is basically like a secret weapon, and it's just one minor thing. But I gotta tell you guys, getting the golden lie is a massive pain in the ass. And as much as I complimented the music in the game, I think making the player listen to the entire song of records, which could take up to 30 minutes of just leaving the game on and listening to music. I just wish that there was a better way to get this golden lie weapon, and you can lock yourself out of getting it if you make the wrong choices, which is an absolute pain. I actually tried using cheats. I don't think this game uses cheat engine, but it has like this console command thing where you can kind of spawn in items. And the crazy thing is that I remember trying to spawn in the golden lie because I just didn't want to deal with just all these things to raise my humanity so that you can pull the golden lie of the portrait so you can use it. And I couldn't use the weapon. I think that the game has like some kind of internal trigger that even if you spawn in the weapon, if you don't meet the humanity requirement, you can't use it. And yeah, I used the golden lie a little bit for the DLC, but I wish that they would have just done something else, just like a different way of getting it. I wish they would have locked it behind some boss or behind like a side area with like maybe a difficult combat challenge or something. With the fact that you have to do all this like story stuff, and again, you can lock yourself out of it if you've answered some of the Arlecchino riddles wrong or you screwed something up. And it was just a huge chore to get this weapon, and I just wish that they would have done something else. That's pretty much it. I've talked about everything I wanted to talk about in Lies of P. I think that the game is incredible. Easily a 10 for me. There's no such thing as a perfect game. I'm not saying Lies of P is perfect, but it's pretty close to it in my opinion. Again, there's minor complaints here and there, but the game's an absolute treat to play. The gameplay is extremely smooth, very responsive. The systems that have come up with are very good. It results in a very smooth and well flowing combat. It is just so much fun. There's so many great bosses in the game. Again, there's only a few bosses that I would deem bad, and honestly, there's only one boss that I really think is like dog shit tier, which is Door Guardian. You can make the argument Black Rubber Brotherhood is good. You can make the argument that the Guardian DLC boss is good. I just didn't really like him too much. But despite those very minor complaints with some of the bosses, and some the minor complaints with the Golden Lie, um, the game is amazing. I love the levels. I love the how the game looks. It's not quite like Bloodborne level in terms of the aesthetic. I do think that Bloodborne has the coolest sort of lore aesthetic, but it's actually kind of close. The game kind of feels Bloodborne esque in its presentation. It doesn't have that sort of cosmic horror element of it, which is what makes Bloodborne so interesting. Um, but it is very good, and honestly, it kind of, in some ways, kind of has with the not demon enemies, but I forgot the terminology. The like sort of like blue enemies that are corrupted. Um, you know, Again, I do think that Bloodborne has a lot cooler stuff. With the crazy alien looking um, monsters. Like Ebridas and stuff. But Last of P comes pretty close, and it's cool that it has the mixture of sort of like corrupted demon looking monsters and then like puppet enemies. You know what I mean? But more than anything, is that the bosses are just a lot of fun to fight. And it doesn't have that pitfall that Sekiro does when you're kind of just locked to your samurai sword. You can do multiple playthroughs with different weapons. There's pretty much three different builds. You got your, actually four builds really. You got your strength, you got your dexterity, you have your sort of balance build. There's some weapons where they'll have equal scaling in dex and strength, and then you have your I forgot what it was called, advance. Yeah, advance. I was gonna say arcane, but that's for a different game. And you got your advanced weapons, which are like your elemental weapons. You got your poison weapons, and there's some thunder ones. You got some fire ones. So there's a great amount of variety. with the game. With the DLC, added a bunch of really unique weapons. You have this like bow that plays differently than anything else. You have like this gun blade, this like gun great sword. You got the claws. So there's very cool set of weapons to play around with in this game. Where it's definitely worth it to play more than once. Again, that's pretty much it. I can't compliment the game enough. Easily, out of every Souls like I've played, I will put this at number two. I think Kazan wins out just barely, just because I really like the Kazan skill tree and how you can change the moveset. Even though Kazan only has three weapons, there's so much variety within that I like Kazan just a little bit more. And it also had the set bonuses. Kazan had the whole set bonus element of the game, which I thought was really cool. And really, to give Kazan a little bit more credit, I think that pretty much every single boss in Kazan was good, whereas Lies of P, I think that at the very least, if we're being as lenient as possible, it has one shitty boss. But I could easily see someone putting Lies of P above Kazan, and I really wouldn't blame them for it. I think both games are like the pinnacle of Souls-like gameplay, and they've outdone, FromSoft themselves, the company that sort of created the genre. So I highly recommend it. It is an absolute beauty to play. It's an amazing game, and that's pretty much it.